Hello, I'm Mark Baer. You're watching the YourTown television program. I'm with Charlotte Eyerman. This is the second half of our interview. Charlotte's an art expert. I guess that's a good enough description.
It works.
You do some. What are you doing? You've recently moved here to Carmel. You have lived here how many years now?
3.5.
3.5 years now.
Yeah.
You're a force.
Thank you.
Yeah, in the best way.
Thank you.
And you know, I was thrilled when I learned that you were here, and I went and watched you lecture, and you're a great addition to the community.
Well, thank you.
And it's so interesting. So coming from LA, we both ended up here from LA, and there's one of everything here.
Yeah.
And you get to meet everybody. Somebody new comes to town. You know, I was so excited when I heard that you were here, because it's one of the great luxuries of living here is that you can go find people and say, hey, and call them up on the phone and say, hey, you're here, hi.
Yeah, and you really realize there's such a diversity of people who come here, I think, because of the natural beauty, because of its proximity, you know, to bigger cities. It's easy to get to, it's beautiful. And I'm always like so inspired to learn, you know, there are Nobel laureates who live here, and like incredible musicians and writers and thinkers, and, you know, people in all different paths, whether it's creative, the creative sector, or, you know, whatever domain. This place attracts everybody. It's a magnet.
Well, the scientific community is amazing here.
Oh yeah.
I've been involved with the Monterey Institute, with the Middlebury Institute here.
Yeah.
Doing you know, their non-proliferation work, and what's going, you know, real solutions for the future.
You know, the international quality of the, you know, all the language training that happens here.
The languages, the Naval Postgraduate School
Yeah.
here. So you're in this place where CSUMB. But this isn't so unusual for places, but what is unusual is it's a small enough place that people cross-pollinate and you can meet these people.
Yeah.
And they're interested in you, and a lot of it, we both lived in traffic. How nice it, you know, I mean, you don't
Although, I have to say, sometimes we rely on a few, you know, major avenues to get us where we need to go.
Yeah, but until you haven't been in the city for a couple of weeks.
That's true. But you do notice the influx also of the kind of event economy and tourism that we have.
Sure.
You know, there's a lot of people flooding in at seasonal times. So, no, it's a wonderful place to live, and there are a lot of really interesting people here, and there's a great tradition, certainly in the visual arts, and, you know, there's that legacy of Ansel Adams and Edward Weston and the California Impressionist painters, and, you know, there's an incredible art legacy. There's also a lot of artists who are drawn to this place because it's so beautiful, and that's an ongoing legacy, which is really nice to see.
I'm always, you know, always about the now, and I'm always interested in what are the conditions. This is what we were referring to a little bit on the last segment.
Yeah.
The conditions that make a thriving art community. What we were referring to is that Paris was the center of the world, and yet it wasn't a big...
At that moment, you know, and then arguably it shifted to New York, you know, and there are books about that. You know, what I like to look at is the historical example of Florence in the 15th century.
Let's talk about
So
this
Florence in the 15th century had all the conditions that we have around us to a certain extent. You know, if you look at, you know, California, broadly construed, or you look at where we are in the Central Coast, you look at the Bay Area, what you've got are, and this is why the Florence example is really interesting. And I gave a talk about this at the Rotary Club locally about 3 years ago when I first arrived here. And there's this phenomenon of a relatively small population, but all the conditions were there. There was a tremendous concentration of highly skilled, highly creative artists and artisans. You know, artist had a different meaning then. An artist belonged to a guild, which is sort of like an equivalent of a union. You know, our idea of the lone genius creating in a studio, it didn't really happen that way, because these artists had armies of people working for them, which persists to this day. There's still the phenomenon of the artist studio. But you had the bankers, right, and the religious leaders, And oftentimes those families, the banking families and the religious families, were the same families. So you had the power centers and a lot of resources, a lot of money. And then you had very strong guilds and very strong commerce. And it was a place that Florence was the banking center. It had a relationship with Bruges in the north. So the reason oil painting was introduced in Italy was because Van Eyck was making paintings, and his colleagues were going back and forth between Italy, what is now Italy, and what is now Belgium. And so you had trade, you had highly skilled people, and you had a kind of ruling class, for lack of a better term, because that's what it was, that really understood the value of art for elevating the city. And ultimately that had to do with their religious conviction, that everything was about the glory of the city, was for the glory of God. So that's a very particular context, because that art that was being made was primarily religious in nature. It was for churches, it was for family chapels. But then there was a whole other set of portraits, the kind of special art that was made for marriages, these round platters that were made, and these boxes that were, you would put the linen in for the newly married couple, and all of those were painted. So there are whole industries that crop up around the kind of creative economy that was in place because of a very strong system that was economic, it was philosophical, in that case Catholicism, and it was also artistic. And those three things really fit together to create incredible conditions for innovation. And they were competitive. They had a lot of competitions. And the artists had to compete, and they'd compete for projects, and they competed for the baptistry doors, and they competed for the dome of the cathedral. So that's why, Brunelleschi's dome in Florence, about which, books have been written, and it's a fascinating tale. Brunelleschi was essentially an engineer, but he solved a problem in a beautiful way. And I think you can look at you look at Silicon Valley. There's a lot of problem solving going on, different kind of architecture, but the conditions are there. It's about aligning the value of the art for the community and together with the resources. And that's what resulted in something like the Italian Renaissance in Florence.
So, I think about Steve Jobs and his passion for design.
Absolutely.
And how much art
informed that.
Is involved in that.
Yeah.
And so, again, nobody, it's a joy and a wonderful thing to live in a small town, but nobody wants to be parochial. You want to, because you feel like you're missing out. Or
you bring it to you.
But you bring it to you, and
right.
And there's no reason that a small place can't be a center of things. That great stuff can't. It doesn't all have to come out of New York. It doesn't have to all come out of Los Angeles. It doesn't have to come out of San Francisco. In fact, this great art, you have to, I believe, be in those places at some point to understand.
I like to be in those places.
Yeah, you have to be, and you don't have to always be in those, but you have to know what the level is.
Yeah.
You have to know what the, you have to know what's expected at the highest level, and people who do know
true.
that, once you know those things, then you don't have to be there. And there's, I find this an extraordinarily creative place where we are, and especially when people communicate with you. And that's one of the reasons I was so thrilled when you got here, because you really upped the game, gave it a lot of academic heft, a lot of clarity in what was what, and you were able to display it and able to enunciate a vision.
Thank you. Well, I do believe that fundamentally, the role of the arts in a community, and the role of whether it's an art museum or a symphony or a theater or whatever the artistic framework is around it, or institutional framework around it, is to connect art ideas and people. And it's really about making accessible new ways of looking at the world, new experiences. It doesn't always have to be a kind of, heavy intellectual experience. It can be, but it can also be about just being transported, of looking at something or hearing something or seeing a performance that takes you to another place and lets you kind of open a new window into a new way of thinking about, the world or yourself or your relationships. And I do think that the conditions here are really wonderful for creatives, because it's always been a magnet. It still is for creative people, but also people in, as you mentioned, the sciences and technology. There's a lot of of really heavy kind of intellectual contribution, right? But I think people also come here to enjoy themselves and to relax.
Well,
and to,
I think the enjoyment is part of the.
It's part of the.
It's part of the whole
It's
thing.
woven into the fabric.
Yes.
It's, you know, the beautiful landscape is all around us, and I appreciate that every single day. You know, I am an urban person by nature, so I do tend to gravitate. I do go to those cities you mentioned,
Yes, of course.
and others a lot. I'm always happy to come back here, but I think the natural beauty is so stunning, and there's a reason why so many of the artists, you know, present day and going back, you know, they came here to paint the landscape or photograph the landscape or to be inspired by it. True also for writers or musicians or, you know, scientists or whoever. But I also think, you know, so much of living here, the quality of life has to do with the natural beauty, but also the incredible, you know, just look at the kind of food and wine culture that we have here. And, you know, you drive out the Carmel Valley Road and there are any number of places that we could go. We could go on a tour, actually.
Yeah.
We could just make our way. It's like being in the south of
I've
France.
been on those tours.
I know.
Yeah.
It's like being in the south of France or being in Italy. I mean, the landscape is so beautiful, and the quality of, you know, the food, I think the commitment to the local growers is really important. I think we can't underestimate enough how important the agriculture industry is here in Monterey County in particular, and to the nation, you know, salad bowl of the world and all that. I think there's a kind of double-sidedness that the natural beauty is also this bounty. Then we have a very diverse community living here because of that. And I think that the agricultural foundation, I mean, it's the biggest driver of the economy here, is very important, as is tourism. And I think the arts are a way to kind of knit together what might be somewhat dispersed domains.
Yeah. And then you know, if you look at, you know, globally, we have Silicon Valley, which is an artificial construct. So we have the technology. We're close to the technology. We're close to the Salinas Valley, the Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
And then this fabulous beauty here. So it is a place in the world once you connect it up.
Well, it's very inspiring. I mean, when I have a lot of relationships professionally in New York and LA and other places. And when I'm in New York, which is quite frequently because a lot of the art world does happen there. So you're right that one doesn't have to be there, but a lot does happen there. There's a reason why
You don't
it's
have
a
to
center.
live there.
That is true.
You have to be at all these places.
I'm frequently
but you have
there,
to live there. Yeah.
because so much happens in the art
Yes,
world, and
yes.
it's museums, it's galleries, it's artists, it's critics, it's, you know, it's collectors, it's all these different facets, and of course we have that on a smaller scale here. I do find it very energizing to be in the big cities, but this is a very beautiful place to live and to come home to. And certainly, you know, my friends in New York, when they see me, which is frequently, they kind of forget that I live in Carmel. And I say, well, I live in Carmel. They say, oh, can you talk to me at this time? And I say, well, I can talk to you, you know, in my time zone. And they're like, what are you talking about? You know, they think I'm on the Upper West Side or something. And I'm like, no, I live on the way West Side. So I'm spending a lot of time in New York, but when you say Carmel, there's this kind of magical look that people get in their eyes. And everybody who's been here, you know, remembers that magical drive down, you know, Highway 1, or that magical, you know, drive on 17 Mile Drive or what have you. And, you know, it is a very magical place, but we're very fortunate.
So who are you looking at contemporary-wise, art-wise?
Well,
What's
I'm
exciting
always very diverse in what I'm working on and what I'm interested in. I just came back from LA over the weekend, and I had been invited to write an essay for a group of artists who are very inspired by surf, skate, and street art. And their work is very California, and the name of the group is the California Locos, and they're very charming, and they're not loco. They're all very charming and lovely and wonderful to work with. But they asked me to write an essay, and I had to kind of think about how to position them in relation to the history of art. So I wrote an essay for them, and I went to their opening over the weekend down in Manhattan Beach in LA, and that was fantastic. And it was a wonderful community event, community art center, you know, all kinds of people were there. It was very California, but it was really enjoyable. As I mentioned, I'm thinking about Picasso also. I'm working on a project kind of looking at him as an innovator and what that means to those of us who aren't artists, but what can we learn from looking at an artist who was so innovative on a very long career. And it's interesting to think about that as opposed to a genius that flowers very early and then the artist doesn't have a career or doesn't, historically artists didn't always live that long.
A life in art, isn't that?
Yeah.
That's, I think, one of the things that I love so much about Picasso.
Yeah.
Well,
he lived it and he reinvented constantly.
Those last portraits, he's somewhat maligned for the last periods. Those last portraits of Jacqueline.
Oh, they're fabulous.
They're knockout.
Well, a lot of times the late work of an artist is judged against the early work of an artist, and it's often, and I think this is also a cliche that is not correct, that artists at the end of their careers are seen as in decline.
Yeah.
In many cases, it's a synthesis or a culmination, and I think that's true of Picasso, I think it's true of Degas, I think it's true of Monet and Cézanne, and any number of artists we could talk about. Another artist who I'm thinking about now is Jeff Koons,
I love Jeff Koons.
Jeff Koons is amazing. He's ubiquitous.
He's the grandson of Marcel Duchamp, as he puts it.
Well, he's carrying on that legacy for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm involved with an organization in New York called the American Federation of Arts, and we're having an event on May 17th in New York City, and Jeff is being honored at that luncheon. And so I'm involved in helping to support that event, and it's a great nonprofit organization that helps to travel exhibitions throughout the country. And it was founded over 100 years ago. And in fact, the American Federation of Arts was responsible for the founding of the Monterey Peninsula Museum in Carmel in 1959. So it's an organization that I've been involved with way before I ever came here for many, many years. And I enjoy supporting them and being involved with them. But there is a kind of connection to this community, which is interesting.
Yeah, I love... Jeff Koons gets so bad rap sometimes, and if you can go and almost knock off any artist and make a piece, you can't duplicate a Jeff Koons piece.
They're very particular, but we were talking about the Renaissance before.
Yeah.
Jeff's model is very much like a Renaissance studio. He employs huge numbers of people to make very specific, exacting kinds of works. And I've met him a few times, and he's a very lovely person. He does get a lot of ink, both positive and otherwise.
And he's a
He's a
persona, or is
person.
that the persona, or is there someone behind the persona, or is that him?
I think in the times that I've interacted with him, he's been very consistent. He's very genuine. He is very conversational. He's a person.
He's got the best rap.
He's
got the best rap. I'm very generous with my art.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
remember Robert Hughes used to just go off on him.
Well, it's difficult to be, I think, that exposed. I think Jeff is on a whole other level.
Yeah.
And, he's often in the news, and I think a lot of times it's provoked. Some artists do that on purpose.
Yeah.
Richard Prince is a provocateur.
Yeah.
And I think but as a person, Jeff is very, very lovely. And he cares about people. He does a lot of work philanthropically that I don't think gets a lot of attention. And I admire that about him.
Yeah. Did you see, just as we wind down, well, I won't start the subject, so I'm going to have you back, and you're going to have
okay.
Ongoing conversation
it'd
here.
be my
because,
pleasure.
This is so much fun for me.
Well, thank you. Well, I hope it's enjoyable for your viewers, and I appreciate the time.
So I'm with Charlotte Eyerman, and this is Mark Baer. You're watching the YourTown television show. We'll have YourTown TV up very soon, yourtown.tv. And all these interviews will be available. And we need your contribution. We need your support. Contact me if you want to be a host, if you have guests that you think should be on this show. And we appreciate it. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.